Okay, guys, we have next speakers, Elena Ivanov from Just GmbH and Philip Donald from Lion Studios, speaking about rapid prototyping. Please, guys, the stage is yours. Welcome.
Super, thank you, Alexander, and thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our talk about rapid prototyping. So today I'm here with Phil Donald. As Alexander said, he is a publishing manager at Lion Studios. But let me first tell you a little bit about myself and the company I work for. My name is Elena Ivanova, yes, and I'm responsible for gaming market at the Just, which basically means that I help game developers to grow using the Just products. What is Adjust? Adjust is the mobile marketing and analytics platform trusted by growth driven marketers around the world with solutions for measuring and optimizing campaigns and protecting user data. Adjust powers thousands of apps with built in intelligence and automation backed by responsive global customer support. In 2021, Adjust was acquired by Uplovin, a leading marketing software company providing developers with a powerful integrated set of solutions to grow their mobile apps. And now it's Phil's turn to tell about himself and Lion Studios. Phil, please go ahead.
Thanks, Lena. So nice to be with everyone. My name's Phil. I've been working with Line Studios for the last 2.5 years as a publishing manager. Line Studios was launched by AppLovin in 2018, and we work with developers to get their games discovered by players all around the world. Our headquarters is in San Francisco. I'm speaking to you from our Berlin office, or my apartment very close to the Berlin office. And Line Studios growth and product teams, we utilize all of it to help developers break the noise and push their business forward.
Cool. Okay, so let's go to the business, right?
Let's do it.
Yeah. What are the main characteristics you are looking in developers or studios?
Sure. So for me, I work with a variety of developers from around the world, and I always have to ask myself a few questions before we start working together. One would be the sort of normal ones. Do I enjoy looking at their games? Is the quality of their art appropriate for the market? But the biggest one for me would be, are they a hungry team? I think in the hyper casual market, that's just the most important thing. I mean, are the teams passionate and hungry about the games they're making? Because if they are, then the games are always going to be much better. But from a more technical side of things, I'm looking at team size. I'm looking at game design experience, something that's really good. So all those things sort of put into the pot of what we're looking for.
Cool. Okay, so let's go to some details like ideation. So,
Mhm.
where the places where to look these ideas, basically.
So my role involves a lot of ideation, designing games from the floor up. And really, there's no bad place to look for an idea of a game. Like there's lots of things that can inspire anyone. One of our most popular games, I Peel Good, started because someone just thought it was satisfying to peel something in that look, and that's what it took from. We look at lots of places. Me personally, like recently, we've been looking a lot of trends on social media. That can be an interesting place to work out what we can design games from. Be careful though, because some of them are quite short-lived. Myself, as a real gamer myself, I'm taking a lot of ideas from indie games, cross-platform games from other devices, so all sorts. But for me personally, it would be looking at other games and seeing what can I get excited about and what can I make a game to get that same feeling.
Cool. Okay, let's imagine we have an idea. How to
Mhm.
confirm in this idea?
Sure. Well, that's really important. So ideas in this industry, of course, we'll be flying around all the time, very, very quick sprints on these ideas. So I think the key questions to ask yourself as a developer when we're looking at idea validation is, first of all, is it different or better than what's currently in the market? That's just a really simple question to ask yourselves. I think different is always going to be getting harder and harder as the sort of volume of games in the eco space increases. But that question of better is always, the best one. Can we make a product better than others? Another one for me personally is I would say game ideas are shared very quickly amongst teams, but is this the best idea for their team? So is this something that suits the production nature of their studio? Is it aligned with their interests as a studio? These are things that we definitely need to sort of ask ourselves. Another one is vision. So we've got an idea, fantastic, that's great. What does level 2 look like in the game? That's a question I think a lot of people sometimes, when they get very excited about a game to go and make it, they don't answer those questions, which down the line is going to be pretty tricky. So for me, it's who has that final vision for the product. That's really to validate that idea. Is that idea validated all the way through?
Okay, sounds good. Like, what about maybe other questions that I should ask myself as a developer?
A question I always get developers to answer. One, it sounds really obvious, but is your game fun? I think that's a really simple question that a lot of developers maybe forget or don't put as much attention to. So the first question I would also always ask is it fun? If we're talking about prototyping a game, is it clear? It's very important. Let's think about the real estate that we have to work with. We sometimes have less than 10 seconds to communicate our game to users across many different places. So is it clear? Is it interesting? Is it fun? 3 very simple questions that I swear will add a lot of value if you really unpack them.
By the way, speaking about questions, guys, attendees, so please go ahead and leave your questions in the chat section. So we will have Q&A session after our conversation with Phil. Okay, next one for you. How important is mechanics over CPI?
I mean, obviously, these 2 things go hand in hand. It's very hard to get a low CPI with a poor mechanic and vice versa. But thinking about the stages of when we're testing, when we're starting to test a game, ask yourself, like, what are we testing here? We're not testing a finished product of a game that's perfectly monetized. The funnel's perfect. We're looking for that base standard. So both are obviously important, but my advice would be that mechanic is king. If you have an interesting mechanic that's different or better, as I said earlier, then that will help drive your CPI down. So always focus on the mechanic first, from my experience. Where we experiment with mechanic, that's where we find the wins. It's much easier to experiment with creative and theme, but if the core mechanic of the game doesn't hold weight, then that's going to reflect in your initial CPI. So I would just say, make sure you're just always thinking about, is my mechanic fun, unique, and better than what's out there?
Okay, cool. And let's say we start, and what we should be focusing on the first test?
So again, I'd ask the question, what are we testing for? An initial test with us, for example, we'd be looking to confirm that our mechanic is sticky, confirm that we have a solid day 0, day 1 user base. So we want to sort of set targets based on time spent within the game, but mainly we're looking at that story of the user of day 1. Are we tracking everything that we can track to give us the behavior of the player? If we're designing an idle game or an idle arcade game, we need to understand on a much more deeper level the user behavior of that game. So I would say that we need to make sure we're tracking everything through custom events, every interaction that the player has with the game. And then that really helps you understand the sort of day 1 journey of that user. So first testing, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for like a solid day 0, day 1, confirming that mechanic is interesting, fun, and we'll have people coming back while giving you the scope and the vision for what I said earlier in our idea validation to sort of fill up that sort of day 1 to day 7 for maybe the next rounds of testing. So what we're looking for the first test, like a solid, well thought out day 0 to day 1 plan would be the top of the list for sure.
Okay, and what our game should look like for the first test?
I've seen games look in many different ways on their first test, but again, I'll just bring it back to like, what are we looking for? Like, mechanic is king. So the key thing to ask yourself is, if we're thinking of mechanic and how clear it is how is the game played? Is it obvious how the game is played from a 5-second video? After that, yes, we've got that. It's clear. Great. Then we can move on. Can you explain your game in just a screenshot? That again is a really, really interesting way of working out if that, is clear to the user. So I would say your game should look clear enough in one screenshot that users can understand the mechanic. And also, is it compelling? So not just how it's played, but why am I playing this game? So why am I playing this game? What, is there obvious progression? Is there obvious juiciness that looks addictive or satisfying? So yeah, those 2 questions I would say super important about what it should look like. It should look clear and compelling or interesting.
Yeah, sounds obviously, but I think that people sometimes forget about that.
I think, yeah, for sure. I think the pace of our industry, I mean, we're pushing products out the door, especially from a developer's side, very quickly. And I totally understand it. You can get carried away with an idea that you think, great, it's fantastic, let's go into this. But I think the good part of working with a publisher is we have this sort of the ability to kind of look at things from a top-down level and understand things and push back at developers and say, we need more thought here, or we need, why am I playing this? Those questions, which are super simple, we can sometimes forget. The question I always ask my developers is what if? It's a really open-ended question and maybe doesn't sound very helpful, but the amount of changes to mechanic that I've managed to get developers to do by asking, let's say we're making a pinball game, and I say, what if we're controlling the obstacles instead of the flappers? That would be a good example of asking that question early on. And that can open up lots of ways, lots of routes into game design, and open it up. So that what I would do. Don't settle early, like ask a lot of questions in that idea validation stage.
Okay, so then the next question is about the content. So how much content should I prepare for the first test as a developer?
Yeah, so for me, again, depending on genre, I'm taking this from a more hyper-casual arcade sort of vibe. With that, I would say that, again, we're looking for that D1 story. So it's very important to not just think about how many levels, like is 10 levels enough? Think about how long your levels take to play. Will players have enough content to come back for 2 sessions a day? If they're doing that early on, it's a good indication that the game is fun. People want to repeat that experience in their first day of playing. So I would do that. One thing that's very important is early funnels. We need to make sure that we build these funnels from day one, and we know exactly what the user is doing. Where are they dropping out of the levels? Is it related to, are they dropping out because of ads? Are they dropping out because the content is too similar? So yeah, building an early funnel and being very rigorous with that funnel after the first 3-4 days of testing should give you a very good idea. So I would say we would like to get users, if we can get users playing upwards of 8 to 10 minutes a day on an arcade game, then that's a nice place to start for development.
Okay, I think that's okay. Next question, what can I take from the previous project? So how do I know if I should take something from my previous project? Because, people sometimes build not their first games, and how to do anything with the previous projects, for example.
Yeah, like it's working smart. And I think that's really, really important for developers. We're working on very quick sprints, very quick turnarounds for these games. So whatever you can take from one project and move into another one is always going to help you as a studio. A, it's cheaper. B, it's faster, which in this industry is obviously very key. So I would take some examples. If we looked at a game that had a very, very low CPI but struggled with engagement, then we know either the theme or the art of that game is performing quite well. What else can we do with that mechanically to change? And on the other side, perhaps we have a game that's produced pretty strong early engagement from first round test, but we're struggling on the CPI. So maybe there the theme and the art is something that needs to be changed. But if you can take something from one project to start another one, like working through frameworks as opposed to just simple ideas. So think about, like, we are now set up as a studio to make runner games. We have our movement stats all set up. We have our collection of assets that we can use. So anything like that can help building up your repository to sort of speed on production. Super, super helpful.
Okay, and let's say we've done the game and then something doesn't work. So when to stop and start working on a new game? When is this moment,
Always sooner than you think is the quick answer to that question. But I think this is, for me, one of the best highlights of working with a publisher is we can help you with that decision of when to move on. When you're working on something that's your baby, that you've been working on for a long time, that you maybe have seen some small areas of success in terms of CPI wins or engagement wins, it can be really hard to let go of that project. So I think for us, one thing that's really important is updates. Updates are a really good way of seeing, are you adding value to the product that you have out? If you're setting out updates to increase CPI, set yourself targets. If we don't hit this, we move on. If we don't hit this engagement bucket, move on, because there are other wins to be found. And it happens ever so often where we sort of see people clinging to one really positive KPI. They might have a really solid day one retention, but everything else in the game seems a little bit unworkable. And this comes all the way back to that first stage of idea validation. What is the vision for the game? I think a lot of these questions can be answered early on, especially in terms of playtime and retention. Did we design enough content? Did we understand the progression of the game enough? So yeah, short answer I'd say is a publisher will definitely help you with that, but you shouldn't be scared to move on from a game that's not working. It's not gonna help you. So anywhere we can help you with that, we're more than happy to.
So you are ready to take the responsibility to say, hey, guys, it's not working.
Part of being a publishing manager is sometimes being the bad guy. That's part of it. But I think it's very helpful for, to have that from another team to step in and say, okay, let's move on. This is something we can focus elsewhere. So I think that's super important as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Phil. So my list of questions is over. So maybe we have questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we don't see the chat. So maybe Alexander can help us. So which period of time for prototyping in hyper casual is actual in 2022? Can you say that hyper casual games become more complicated and teams need more time to create a prototype?
That's a good question. I think speed is always going to be everyone's main concern when making these games. I would say that it's mixed. I've seen some games recently go from their first test to a soft launch within 2 weeks. So, there is still scope and space in the industry for that to happen. So I wouldn't say teams on average need more time per prototype anymore. It depends when we're starting. If we start a prototype from ideation, then I would say, yes, more time should be taken on that side of things before we test. Testing starts before we set the campaign live. Testing starts when we've decided on an idea and we're working to that end. So as long as the work's put in there, I feel that we don't need to be rushing. So there is time. Execution will always win over rushing a product out into time. So I don't think I would say teams need more time, but just focus that time earlier in the production stage rather than later when we're trying to plug holes as opposed to design something that doesn't have holes in the first place.
Okay, what about this being complicated, that hyper casual games became probably
more complicated? I'm not sure.
There are no this hybrid games, so it's kind of still hyper casual games, but with some meta and so on and so on. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, with the prevalence of arcade idle games, for example, pushing the market very quickly, like that moves the market. People jump on these trends very quickly. I would say, like, again, it goes back to what is your focus as a team? What is your strength? What is your interest? Try and stick to that as much as possible. It's very tempting to go and chase. You see a game, you see an idle game and think that looks easy, I'll go and make one of those, where actually it's a very different process to what your studio should be building their skill base in. So stay true to that. Get some solid advice on theme for ideas, but just keep going down that route of what you're good at, what your studio can focus on.
Okay, thank you. So next question, which earliest test research methods do you use? What is the earliest stage you can drop the idea and on which conditions?
Sure. So again, we asked that question, what are we testing for in an early test? For me, it would be the usage of day one. So two really handy metrics I find to making very early ones are, of course, our initial CPI. That's unavoidable. Like that, as we know, they've been climbing for a long time, but we still do find wins there. So initial CPI, I would set a limit. If we're testing our game for the first 3 days and our CPI is well over $1, it's a sign to me that perhaps that's not a great theme to pursue. But for me, more interestingly, if we're thinking of mechanic, I would think of those play times and the session numbers. So if we've got 2 session numbers, a day, two sessions a day, and with solid like 8-9 minutes of usage, that to me would be moving on. Anything less than that, I would say isn't a hot game, isn't a really exciting prospect to carry on with.
Okay, thank you. So next question, what is the typical ratio of game success, go live, VC failure?
I think, Elena, you could probably answer that one more than me. It's low. I mean, of course, it's low in an industry where we're turning around projects, sometimes in a couple of weeks. I would hate to try and guess an estimate on this, but I would say less than 10% of games that we test, I would say, make it to a global launch.
By the way, like first test, it can be how long?
How long is a typical first test?
Yeah.
I would say about 3 days, you'll have all the answers you'll need.
Okay, pretty fast. Yeah. Okay.
For a first test, yeah. I mean, this is all about rapid prototyping, right? So you can make a game as fast as possible, but if you don't make the business decisions based on that game fast as well, then there was no point in rushing that. There's no point in getting that game out so quickly. We've got to be able to be critical and sort of hold ourselves to these standards really, really implicitly. It's very important. So yeah, very, very soon. The sooner the better is the answer to that.
Yeah, then you can take decision really fast.
And then we can go back to, okay, was there something in this game that we can use to skip the first week of the next game's production? So this is it's all cyclical. This whole rapid prototyping thing is cyclical. Like every time you test something, you should learn something from that. And that's something that a publisher can really help you with. We have a lot more time to be looking at data. We have, a lot of games that we're testing comparable data. So sometimes we can be quite myopic as developers, thinking that we've got 40-day retention, that's the end of it. But like a publisher can help you to really sort of see the bigger picture and tell you where your game fits in that picture.
Okay, there's again kind of the same question I asked. How much content is enough for a CPI test? And do animations and nice UI are important?
It's a good question. Of course, for me, it's about that working smart again. Am I going to spend 3 more days? My mechanic is finished. Am I now going to spend 4 days juicing up the UI? The answer to that, probably not. The mechanic, again, is going to be like art is obviously incredibly important in your CPI, but for me, the mechanic is the thing that's hardest to improve and change. So I would say, for a first CPI test of a typical runner game, for example, let's look at 10 levels. Let's see how many people are completing those exact 10 levels. We'll loop those levels and see if people are sticking to that mechanic, even with a lack of variety in gameplay. So I would say for a hyper casual runner, between 10 and 15 levels, depending on your level completion time, is about right.
Cool. Next question. Which creative methods, except of reuse of mechanics, you can recommend to innovate in games?
So again, ask that question, what if, all the time. Don't settle for, we're going to make a runner game. Okay, what if we're controlling the road, instead of the runner? So I think a lot of questions are answered very quickly. Like, we're making a runner game, so it must be X, Y, Z. Break that. Like, ask those questions that I mentioned earlier. Like, what if we did this? What if we did that? All new mechanics have been experimented on. There's no, people don't find them. They dig around and they make them. So just be creative. Make sure that you have time for ideation in the week. With my teams, I like to have one meeting, which is the nistly gristly, going through data and telling them which games we're killing, which is very sad, and which ones we're going on with, which is excellent. But the other time is pure ideation time, where we get together with the team and we really sort of hone in on an idea and work on a really detailed game design document. So yeah, I would say that just keep asking questions, keep experimenting, and bounce ideas off each other.
Okay, thank you. Next question is a small studio. What individual's talents are a must to be on the team to successfully rapid prototype?
Yeah, again, I'll pull us back to this work done before. Any work done at the design stage is the most important in terms of hyper-casual development. So if you're a small studio, 1-2 people, I would just make sure that you have a really solid game designer. So who's asking those questions early. What does level 5 look like? Where are we going to add variety? Where could we possibly insert RVs here? So the game designer, I would say, is worth its weight in gold. A solid good game developer who can help you ideate early is going to be great. Like, for me, it would be that a solid GD.
Cool. And probably this person asked the second time, how we can split the routine on a weekly basis, like how much time to spend on ideation, sketching, prototyping, working on CPI videos, etc.
Yeah, there's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot to be working on all at the same time.
Yeah.
Set yourself some targets. Say we want to get this project ideated and tested in 6 weeks, and then work backwards from that. What's the date of your CPI? What's the date of that CPI test, and work backwards. I would say you would need 3 solid days of, if we're starting from scratch, like 3 solid days of ideation. An ideation, I mean game design as well, like sorting that design. And then, yeah, like prototyping, I would probably bounce maybe 1 or 2 builds to the publisher, to me, who can test the mechanic early, help you with those questions. What if we did this? What if we did that? Once we're happy with the mechanic, then we can put the work into putting, first art passes. We want the game to be passable. We want the game to be clear and compelling. We don't need the game to be completely finished in terms of art. So again, focus on your mechanic. Make sure the art is pleasing. We don't want to make ugly games; they'll never have a chance. But focus on that mechanic and really do the work on the design first. That should be everyone's focus moving up to a CPI test.
Okay, so that was the last question, and I think there's a good question how to reach out to you if there is some gaming developer who wants to work with you, how they can start.
Of course. Well, I would urge anyone who's working on in the hyper casual space now to consider working with Lion. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can reach out to me personally at philip.donald@lionstudios.cc, or you can go to our website lionstudios.cc, which will help you guide through the submission process. It will take you through an introduction of the tools that we're using in order to do that, and all the information can be found there. And hopefully, some people that I'm sort of talking to on this speech that I can't see, hopefully I'll be talking to you in a Zoom call one-on-one, telling you that your game's been fantastic in its first test. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, it would be great. Another question we got. Should
Sure.
studio adjust the mechanics to the player? For example, based on data, players play in a specific way which deviates from studio's assumptions.
It's a tough question. I'm not quite sure on sort of suiting a mechanic to a certain player. I'm not sure how we could really discern that. Like for me, it would be experimentation. So if you have a question to ask about that, make sure you're making big changes to the mechanic. If you're asking whether it's going to make a huge change if we change, if we change it to an uphill and downhill of a runner, let's say, probably not going to provide you a huge amount of information. But if we completely change the way that the game is played in terms of mechanic, then you can start to see which one of those people prefer and fits more into that game. So when you're trying to find out anything on impact, make as big a swing as possible when you're doing those changes. Small A/B tests where you're doing, minute changes in terms of look, aren't going to give you any sort of significant data that you can use. So yeah, go big, ask big questions, and then get answers to those questions through A/B testing.
Yeah, I think in general, hyper casual games, they are for broad audience, so that's why I think they're not that specific. It should be really general,
we want everyone to be able to play these games. A good test I have is my sister has a 4-year-old son, and I have a 75-year-old mother. I make them both play the game, and I can see if a 75-year-old woman and a 4-year-old boy can work it out, then it's good to go.
Yeah, by the way, it's a good idea, guys. Just free tip, you can use it.
Yeah,
Yeah, we don't have. I think we don't have any questions in chat. I don't know. Should we stay? Should we go? Okay, one more question. People don't let us go. Is it considered more important to release a game product by a certain time rather than a better game, but a little later?
Again, quite loose
Perfection
with the
game, yeah.
a certain time, a little later. Again, quality is but think of that question we asked ourselves in the beginning. Is it better? Is it different? If you can say yes to both of those questions, but it's going to take you one more day, take that day. If it's going to take you another year, then you need to work on something different. So I would say it's time, of course, is a pressure. It's just an industry pressure. I wouldn't say it's a game specific pressure. Your game isn't going to get any worse if we test it 2 days later. But again, it will be up to a publisher for us to decide, yes, that looks appropriate for a day one test. Yes, that seems to be enough content for a day one test. So again, that's something that you can take from us as, I know developers are perfectionists. I work with them every day. I know that you just don't want to test something that you could change. But if you ask yourselves honestly, are you ever really satisfied completely with the game that you've sent out? I know there are always going to be changes. So my role specifically as a publishing manager is to step in and say, we're ready, let's go. We can do all this later. Let's plan for this later in terms of when we have data to make those decisions. Any decision we're making before we test is not a data-led decision. It's an experience decision from our side. And then once we have the data from our first test, we can start showing you that we were right. So there we go.
Yeah, I need someone like you because in my experience, I have a lot of game developers who can't start work with the just because the product is not ready yet. So 1 year more, I'm already, just stop asking because I think when they're ready, they will come. Yeah, but they really try to make it perfect, and unfortunately, there is nothing perfect.
I totally understand that concern from the developer side. You're constantly getting the message. Whenever you hear anyone speaking about hyper casual, one of the first things people say is fast paced. That's one of the first things they describe the industry as, and that can put pressure on a small team, to deliver these products quickly. But again, just always go back to, is it different? Is it better? And then rely on your publishing team to help you make those decisions.
Cool. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, guys. I think this is last question, and because we are the last session, so we wish you Happy weekend. Enjoy your time. Thank you for your attention and attending our sessions today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.